Welcome into Floyd Street's finest. He is avid Pittsburgh Steelers fan, Mark Lieberman. I'm Jack Grossman. This is Floyd Street's finest, talking Louisville basketball. But coach, a lot of listeners probably aren't happy with the Steelers hat. You have a lot of Lamar Jackson fans in
Uh,
Louisville.
you're absolutely right, but you know what? And I love Lamar and respect him, but I grew up a Steelers fan, and in Tomlin we trust right now, and the way we're playing, you know, it, the Chiefs, as great as Pat Mahomes is, and he's one of the best ever, their defense has carried them the last couple of years, and so our defense is solid. We know who we are. We have an identity. I'm loving pro football right now, Jack.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I was a little skeptical, I think is the right word, when they pulled Justin Fields for
So was
Russ,
I. So was I.
but it's worked out for them so
I,
far.
I mentioned Tomlin. I mean, how many? Right. It's like our offensive line was kind of in disarray, and you have a scrambling quarterback who can make up those yards. But Russell Wilson has looked great. George Pickens has come alive. Our running game. It's a good time to be a Steeler fan, Jack.
It is that AFC North is just wild every year, and it'll be fun to see
Yeah.
what Pittsburgh, Baltimore, the rest of those teams do going down the pipe. But we're talking basketball here. Floyd Treat's finest part of the Field of 68 Podcast Network. Like, subscribe, follow us, all that stuff on Twitter, Spotify, YouTube. I'm at Jack Grossman 97 on Twitter. He's at Coach Lieberman. I'm actually on Blue Sky now. Jack Grossman on that. I got my
Okay.
actual name, which I was very happy about.
Wow.
But I
And you
know.
mentioned it at the beginning of the show, which is
I
something that
remembered
you
to do it.
you did. You did. I'm
Yeah,
proud of
what's
you.
about a 12% hit rate, I would say I got on that. So we're doing
Okay.
good. We're off to
Excellent.
a good start here.
Excellent.
But Floyd Treats finest part of the Field 68 Podcast Network. We're talking Louisville basketball. The Cards finally felt like a brief early hibernation for people that follow the team after that
Hmm.
10-day break after the Tennessee loss. We're back in action on Tuesday night, and they were able to get a 100-68 win over Bellarmine in a game that I would argue was a little bit more to look at than what you just see on the surface with a 32-point win. But coach, what do you think about Louisville kind of having that 10-day break to kind of, as we talked about last time, refocus, work on some things after the Tennessee game, and this being the first chance to show how much they've come since that game?
Sure. And I don't think this game was indicative of what they've been working on. You could tell
Right.
just by Troy probably getting hurt how physical. And we talked about last podcast. I'm sure it was a physical practice. It was rebounding. It was bumping cutters. We talked about coaches maybe using pads. All those type of things I'm sure were elements of their practices. And I don't think they were just gearing towards, okay, we're taking 8 or 9 days to prepare for Bellarmine. They're preparing for the long run because you saw that in the game. Because what Bellarmine does, they ran two ball screens in the entire first half, and both were out of necessity. And you're guarding diagonal shuffle screens, you're guarding chin action, you're guarding post ups by the guards, stuff that Louisville probably didn't spend as much time on. Now it kind of showed because they were late on switches, the communication, being able to recover. And I think they just out athleticized them mostly in the first half. It was, look, they made shots. They came down and they made shots because of length, and a lot of offensive rebounds just because of positioning, because of the length they had. So I don't think it was a show me performance saying, okay, we're back and all those type of things. They got through it, and I think going into Winthrop and then the Bahamas is really where they're measuring stick and what they're preparing for with the physicality of an Indiana with their bigs.
Right, I'm with you on that, because I thought a lot of the things that Louisville struggled with in the game against Bellarmine was they struggled with the off ball cuts, the back cuts especially, whether it be guys just kind of cutting almost like I want to call it a UCLA cut. It isn't a UCLA cut because it was completely off ball. It wasn't a pass first, but
Right.
that
What they
screen.
do, yeah, what they do a
Yeah,
great job of. So the most dangerous player a lot of the times, Jack, is the passer. So the passer is going to cut, and he's going to receive a what's called a shuffle screen or a shuffle cut. There's a diagonal back screen. They're cutting off the high post a lot,
yep.
called chin action. They're splitting off that. They get the ball to the third, fourth, fifth side as well as any team in the country, because on ball reversal, that passer now is coming off that diagonal screen. And there was a lot of times that Louisville was late reacting, bumping that cutter, or staying with their man, or expecting a switch, and that wasn't there. So, but they're not going to see a lot of that action throughout the year. but that's what Bellarmine does, and they do it really well. So you're not going to simulate that in a few days and prepare yourself for that. I think they could have done a better job of communicating and more ball pressure and sort of bumping those cutters a little bit better. But for the most part, their physicality was showing towards the offensive boards and on the defensive boards as well.
Yeah, which I'd say the rebounding was the one thing. I know I'm with you to where there's not really a whole lot you can take away from this game because just how much more athletic Louisville was than Bellarmine.
Mm-hmm.
But the rebounding's the one thing where I don't know if it'll translate against the Indianas or the Gonzagas or the Dukes or so on and so forth. But even in the Morehead State game, Louisville's only +4 on the glass in that game. So I do think it is noteworthy. It's not life change. Like I don't think everything's fixed when it comes to the rebounding, but
Mm-hmm.
that Louisville was what +12, +13 on the glass in this game.
Right.
That they only let up 4 offensive rebounds and 2 of them were on 1 possession early in the first half. I do think that is a noteworthy thing that, especially after the Tennessee game, where we know as we've talked about it at length last week and mentioned even earlier on tonight that they were going to really work and drill rebounding to see it pay off in a way, yes, against a team that's not nearly as big, as strong, athletic as you are, but still be able to go and do that, I think is a step in the right direction. Not that everything's
Mm-hmm.
solved, but it's a step in the right direction.
It is, and you saw that. You saw the effort. It was a little bit was different than what they had shown, but you're not going to get that measure because there's times that the rebounds just because your guy James Scott is 6'10" and the guy's guarding him is 6'5", and there's times that's just going to happen. But you saw a little more physicality. I like to use the term car crashes instead of box outs, and that's something that Louisville is big on as far as hitting guys and so on, and then pursuing offensive rebounds and then defensively keeping them to one and done. And when you're playing at Bellarmine, there's going to be long shots, so there's going to be those long rebounds, and I think they pursued the basketball pretty well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I will say how much because they as we've been talking about, they struggle with the shin actions, the diagonals, all the back cutting. We really seem to think like, okay, that's a lot of it is because of that's obviously what Bellarmine does, but you mentioning that Louisville kind of didn't really, it sounds like, prepare as much for Bellarmine as much as it was we're using these 10 days to try to get better as a team. But I thought Louisville played maybe out of the 40 minutes, 18 to 20 good minutes defensively. And I think the big difference is when you take all the struggling to defend the cutting and all the actions and the ball reversals out of it. It's when Louisville played with intensity on the defensive end, we're active on the defensive end, and we're in passing lanes, we're getting deflections. That's where they were kind of able to overcome the fact that they weren't really defending, Bellarmine's off ball stuff very well. In terms of when they kind of let Bellarmine settle in, that's where they were able to hang around for large stretches of the first half, kind of go on an 8-0 run, get within 15 at one point in the second half, and look competitive in parts of the game.
Yeah, and there's it's almost a patience defensively because you're not going to get as many steals. You want stops when you're playing a Bellarmine. You're not just there. That ball is going to be swung. They're going to have player movement more than any other team in the country. You're just not used to seeing that. It's a different. When I was at Louisville, the same thing. We're preparing for Bellarmine. It's like going to the dentist because you just have to be patient and understand. You want stops, not steals. You got to play positioning. Bellarmine's waiting for one breakdown. They're waiting for one guy, and it's all reads. If you're overplaying, they're going to back cut, and then the screener is going to pop open, and they have all counters to those type of things. But at the same time, when you're playing in college basketball, any team in Indiana can take something from this game and say, you know what, we're going to set a screen to screener action, a shuffle into a pin down, or we might run some chin because this is where they're susceptible to some defensively that we can get some open looks. So you'll take something. Other teams will take. We all as college coaches, you'll look at film. Wow, this will work against them. We're going to run this set. You always because teams are always evolving. You don't stay the same. You're getting better or worse. So teams are going to say, okay, we're going to put in 2 or 3 sets against a Louisville, against a Indiana, against a Duke because this worked. So that's what happened. So they're going to look at the film from the Bellarmine game and say, okay, how can we attack the defenses? Because that's what you do in scouting. It's not just knowing the plays, Jack. It's saying, all right, this is how we can attack a Louisville team. And I think Louisville has got to get a little better on the defensive end, no doubt. Guarding the actions from the Tennessee game, it was ball screens, it was overhelping, it was not showing out on some of the pin downs. From this game, being late on some of the stuff and having the bigs understand, even if you're not involved in the actual action, swiping or showing out And like I said, if you watch this game, a lot of times off a pass, the guy who's guarding the ball is standing up. And that's the most dangerous player, as I said, is the passer sometimes. So whether he's going to come off a UCLA cut, or he's just going to face cut you, or he's going to be a screener, you've got to be alert. You've got to be prepared. You got to be in a stance. And that's something I'm sure they're going to just keep pounding away at and getting better. And maybe we'll see that on Friday against Winthrop.
Right, because you play a team like Indiana next week, and Indiana doesn't have the best ball move of anyone in the country. They don't run a lot of complicated stuff, and they're not going to reverse the ball 4 or 5 times like Bellarmine does and then run a chin action, but they can run a more simple version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And see, has Louisville improved from the standpoint to where they're going to be able to defend that? And I think that's something that not just Indiana, Gonzaga, if they were able to get by Indiana, Gonzaga is a team that runs a lot of really, really good stuff on the offensive end.
No doubt.
And they play with a lot more pace than Bellarmine does, to where they get into it a lot quicker than Bellarmine does, to where that could be something that you could see Mark Few, who is one of the best tacticians in the sport, especially on the offensive end right now, seeing that and saying, okay, we're going to implement a little bit of this along with our, all of our high ball screen stuff with, trying to work EK in the post and all that type of things.
Yeah, and that's what happens. So there's a coach on Gonzaga's staff who's going to be assigned the Louisville scout. And so he's already looking at that film from the Bellarmine game, and he's already toying with, hey, going to Coach Few and saying, these are some things that are going to work, some actions that we need to look at, stuff that we have in our back pocket. Because you're always adding, whether it's UOBs, underneath, whether it's side out of bounds, whether it's sets, different things that you're going to do. It's always implementing and getting better. And one thing as well, like you saw Louisville get beat again on a underneath out of bounds play early on. They have a guy on the ball, and then they kind of switched it where they having the guy who's guarding the inbounder kind of was his back to the passer now. And that mentality is you're guarding all slips and layups now, and you're protecting a little bit more, because against Tennessee, they gave up early the back screen dunk. So preparing for that, because all teams are going to go into games when you play Winthrop, and certainly against Indiana, they're going to have an underneath out of bounds play that you haven't seen.
Yeah, and I would say Mike Woodson does run some good out of bounds stuff. I do give him that. that they do get some success off that. But when you try to take away the slips and the layups and the overplays, where are you more susceptible to give other stuff on the back end? Because you're never going to take everything away on one play.
Right, you're not going to take it away, and then of course now the inbounder becomes a threat. So there's a lot of times where now he becomes a guy that's going to come off. He's passing it in. They're going to set a pin down for him, and you're going to have to react. Maybe you're going to switch out, and that leaves you susceptible where now a smaller guy is guarding the screener, who's usually a big. So you're never going to take anything away, but you have to be alert, and you can't be late and lazy. And you have to understand, again, you saw even on the first game against Tennessee where Troy was kind of playing his guy at the top, and he could have been digging and swiping on that back screen for the dunk that Tennessee had. Last game, Ben Johnson just curls it, and there's kind of like there's no resistance on that, and getting in front, anticipating, and being in a stance and taking away certain things. You just have to be alert, almost in two places at once. And I always call it special teams. So no matter what, when you're in underneath out of bounds, you're a side out of bounds, you just want to give up a 45-yard punt and a fair catch. You don't want to give up a long punt return for a touchdown. So the biggest thing is they get the ball in, fine, they're going to run their stuff, but we're not giving up an easy basket off an out of bounds play. And then for Louisville, that's something, they've got to clean that up as well.
I feel like the big thing, if you've won as the defense in a baseline out of bounds situation, is when they have to throw the just the escape pass all the way back to out court. Just kind of like that's kind of like the admittance of, okay, we got absolutely nothing. For the love of God, we just got to get the basketball.
Right. That's the fair catch. And even when I was back at Louisville, and I'm big on that. We never want the offensive player to go straight back on the same plane path. We want him to take an angle so the passer can understand that the defender can't read it, because those are 50-50 balls. Watch how many times a guy goes straight back, and that's basically a jump ball. And so that's what we want to force. We don't want to give anything. We want to take away all slips and layups going towards the rim. We want to force a guy to go straight back. You'd be surprised how many even college teams, guys just go straight back, and you watch some steals. And teams work on it. I mean, wherever I've been, Richard Pitino was really, really good at that, and changing some things up and making sure that we were not giving that up. And then teams would go straight back and trying to take that away. But you're exactly right. That's what we're trying to force.
I was going to ask you about this later in the podcast, but you mentioned him, so I got to do it now. The Pitino Bowl. Who are you rooting for?
Just watching again. just a fan watching it. But I kind of felt that, going in there after losing to him when he was at Iona, when Coach Pitino was at Iona, and losing at New Mexico, I didn't think Coach Pitino was going to lose another one to his son. So, he wanted to make sure it was the rubber match will be played at some point. So almost like in Rocky 3 at the end when Clubber Lang and excuse me, when
on Apollo.
Apollo
Yep.
and Rocky just walk in and ding, ding. And they just, they get the rubber match there. So who knows? But, yeah, it was, and look, no matter what, it's always a little uncomfortable for both of them, but, they enjoy the competition. So, and for me, just watching the game and enjoying it.
It was a good game too.
Yeah.
New Mexico kind of battled back a few times. Looked like St. John's was in position to kind of blow it open there for a little while, but both teams look pretty good. St. John's now goes down to the Bahamas, not
Yep.
Atlantis,
Mm-hmm.
but the other tournament.
Yep.
They get Baylor on Thursday night. New Mexico
Mm-hmm.
already beat UCLA earlier in the season,
Mm-hmm.
so I think a quality game for both teams and a lot of good pieces for both of them.
Yeah, they're both, I think, going to be tournament teams. I like what how Nelly Joseph is playing, and Dent's a tremendous player, and then Coach Pitino's squad is just loaded. When they all get it together, he's always talked about his best teams. All his teams play their best basketball in January, so that when that team gets in the groove, they're loaded. They're just, even the Smith kid. I just think they're going to be really, really good.
That team reminds me a little bit of the 2012 team when you were on staff, just from the standpoint of they're not pressing the same way. They're not playing the 2-3 zone nearly as much as you guys did, but just how much they can stifle you defensively and just rely so much on that end of the court. And to be quite frank, they don't have a lot of 3-point shooting at this point. I would say that would be the great wart on that team at this stage, but just what they're able to do defensively. And they're a lot bigger. Like it's not Peyton and Russ out there, but it's a different type of defense than what he was doing back at the Louisville days, but still incredibly effective.
Oh, absolutely. And not having the 3-point shooting is driving him crazy, but at the same time, being able to score off the defense and having the athleticism and the size that they have, that's the give and take. But he'd always prefer to have guys that can shoot the rock.
We'll get back to Louisville here, but one last question: how does a guy like Rick Pitino, who was so revolutionary with the 3-point shot so early on, a trailblazer for how so many teams play basketball these days, run into situations, whether it be that the 2012 team that made the Final Four? You got to always say that Louisville, or a team like this year to where he doesn't have the type of shooting that you would think of a guy like Rick Pitino having.
Well, he's adaptable, and so he understands that. He's not going to force it down. He's going to play just like even when he had at Iona. He's playing, and they had some shooters, but they're playing inside out, and he understands what he has. They're going to put, he's always going to implement different ways. It's not like he's just going to force into a whatever this square peg into a round hole and all that kind of stuff. He's going to understand what his roster is, and he's going to play that way, and they're going to be more physical and go inside and attack and play downhill, and they're going to be effective at it. So, he'll get the best out of what he has with those guys.
Yeah, it's something I thought about that we were talking about a little earlier when you're talking about Bellarmine, how much, how patient they are offensively. I fear a little bit making this comparison because of the stigma that goes along with what the other team I'm thinking of. But it feels like an offensive version of the Tony Bennett Virginia defensive teams in a lot of ways, to where Bellarmine, the way they play, like just passing the ball, moving, just forcing you to say, okay, we're going to use the full 28, 29, 30 seconds of the shot clock, banking that you're going to make a mistake eventually. When you do, we're going to capitalize on it. Whereas Virginia was backline defense and really slowing the game down both ways, saying, we don't think you're going to be disciplined enough on either end of the floor to keep us from getting what we want eventually offensively, and to keep working the ball the way you need to break down our defense on the defensive end.
Yeah, it is similar, and everybody takes bits and pieces of a pack line and gap integrity and shrinking the gaps, which is what Bellarmine does. But you look at Virginia, they still had good enough athletes where, as much as you're
Cal Guy, Ty Jerome, like DeAndre Hunter,
you're not beating those guys off the bounce. Yep. And when you do, they did have rim protectors and they had bigs, and that was something that they were really good at, and walling up. And you just take a Bellarmine, and just this lack of size or the physicality is just not there. And so, no matter what, it's similar, but it's almost like Virginia's just longer and
Right.
stronger, and it's just more physical. And that means the gaps are going to be smaller for guys to try and get through. So, that's just something that Bellarmine's just going to struggle with. And they just, and the ASUN is that conference has gotten a lot better.
Yeah, it has Liberty not in the league anymore, but still a lot of
No,
talent in
they've
that
got
league.
they've got
Yeah.
North Florida's playing really good basketball.
Yeah, they've been the darlings of the mid major so far,
Yep.
upsetting South Carolina, Georgia Tech,
Yep.
took
And
Georgia down the wire.
North Alabama just lost by 1 to Samford, and that's another good team. So there's some really good teams in the ASUN for sure.
Yeah, it's a fun mid major league. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
That is, but Louisville now, if you're looking ahead, well, we'll touch quickly on the Winthrop game. I want to talk about the Bahamas just because
Mm-hmm.
it's no offense to Winthrop. They're a solid mid-major program. They're a step up, I think, from what Louisville's seen from the non-Tennessee competition so
Yep.
far. But let's be honest here. A lot of this is about the Bahamas, and then after that, Ole Miss, Duke, Kentucky, all that stuff. So, but what do you want to
And
see?
Jack, and
Yeah,
that's something I would touch on because understand players are humans. They're and sometimes we almost think of them as robots. So to think that
John
after,
Calipari says they're not robots.
well, they're touche. They you see it after a Tennessee game, it's like, all right, let's go play another big dog. We want to play another big dog. So it's almost like getting through Bellarmine, getting through Winthrop. Let's get to the Bahamas already. It's almost like, all right, let's get through these games. And they might not look their best. They might not look as sharp as they're going to be. Just like when we were watching Tennessee against Gardner Webb or watching, they didn't look as sharp. They're just waiting to play those games. And sometimes that just happens. Those teams are like, okay, we want to get to prove how good we are. And don't think Louisville doesn't feel that way. The players feel that way. It's you almost as a coach you're like, hey, it's every game it matters, every practice matters, and all the cliches that you're trying to get these guys to just focus on. But yeah, to think the players aren't looking ahead and saying they're excited about that opportunity to play Indiana, it's natural.
Well, let me ask you this then, because just did a quick KenPom check. Winthrop's 179th in KenPom, so that's not the type of, they're not top 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever, but that's the type of team that sits around there and says, okay, if you don't take them seriously, you could struggle and be in more of a dogfight than what you expect to be. That's KenPom only has Louisville winning by 14. That's what Torvik has also. To where if Louisville comes out and wins that game by 30, that's a bit more impressive than beating a Morehead State by 48 or whatever it was. But how do you avoid kind of that mentality, especially against a team that is a little bit stronger suited to where they can challenge you a little bit more than someone like no offense to a Bellarmine or Morehead, but a Bellarmine or a Morehead, and just try to make sure you keep the team locked in before obviously Indiana and the Bahamas loom.
Yeah, you rely on your vets and whoever your go-to guys are.
Which Louisville
And
has plenty of vets.
right. So if it's a Peyton Siva saying, hey, make sure these guys are locked in. If it's going to Chucky Hepburn saying, Chucky, and I'm saying Peyton Siva when he was a player.
Right.
I'm saying now, hey, Chucky, make sure these guys understand that we're no slippage. We're down 7 to start the game. Our first 5 minutes are the most important. We want to get off to a great start. We want to have a great energy. We want to have our 10 deflections. We want to make sure we're communicating and we're just after it defensively. So that we're showing something. And as a coach, you're saying, look, Indiana's looking at us play. We want to give them reason to have some fright and say, look, this is how absolutely just demonic we're playing on the defensive end. And offensively, we're just getting out and going. And we're just pushing the pace, and we're bending our back on every attack of the bounce, and we're attacking the offensive board. So that's really what you're infusing in your guys and making sure that everything is a standard. And that's what you build, and that's what you expect from. And you said it. You have Terrence Edwards, you have Chucky Hepburn, you have these guys that Hadley, these guys who have played in the moments and saying they understand this is all step. We don't want to have a slip up, and all of a sudden, we're in a situation where now. We're desperate because we're in that type of situation. So they want to come out and play well on Friday because I'm telling you that I'm sure they're not happy with the performance on last night against Bellarmine.
Right.
And there were some mistakes, and I'm sure the film study, Coach Kelsey talked about, watching the game 4 or 5 times after Tennessee, which is what every coach does. Every coach is watching it 4 or 5 times, win or lose. And then you're looking for those little cracks. And it's going to be the same thing from last night. And almost saying, hey, we've got to improve in these areas.
Yeah, which I'd say there is a lot to go back on. Because again, 32-point win after the way the last couple years went, especially Louisville would take a 32-point win over anyone, especially a Bellarmine team that beat them 2 years ago and took him down to the wire last season. But the fact of it is, we're
Well,
not.
Bellarmine won last year.
No, Bellarmine won 2 years ago. Last year, Louisville won. I think it was 67-63.
Was it?
Yeah,
I trust you.
I'll double check
You're
that real quick.
you're probably right. So I just yeah.
But they lost some bye games last year for sure. It went down to the wire. I know Bellarmine led at halftime, but it was 73-68 actually. Bellarmine
Okay.
won or Louisville won that
Gotcha.
game. So 5-point game, very competitive. It went right down to the wire. So obviously step forward to, win by 32, but
32, and we're like,
yeah.
we're
But I mean, but my point is
Mhm.
when you're a program, first of all, like Louisville, you're when you expect to be a top 10, 15 program year in, year out. This is how people talk about you when you play these types of games. It's, great, you won by 32, but here's the laundry list of things we think you could have done better because, you're playing big boys in a week and a half type of deal.
Mhm.
To where I think it is a shift now that we've already seen from the Bahamas and the exhibitions in the Moorhead game of, okay, you want to be an NCAA tournament team. Yes, there was a lot of things you did well, but 6 assists in the first half. The ball movement wasn't as crisp as it's been in other times, which is something that I know Pat Kelsey was definitely talking about at halftime because they came out in the second half. I think they had assists on their first 5 buckets in the second
Mhm.
half. But whether it be that or the stuff defensively, we're seeing like, okay, here's what we think. You still got to nitpick. I know and it is very nitpicky, but here's where we're still looking to see, can you improve in the Winthrop game going into the Bahamas next week? Because once you get to the Bahamas, there's not really a lot of breathing room there for you. I mean, after that, you get Ole Miss, you get Duke, you get Kentucky, you get Carolina. It is full throttle. I think Louisville may have one, maybe two more bye games like this. They got UTEP on December 11th,
Right.
EKU on December 28th. But other than that, it's high major teams the rest of the year. This is kind of the last chance for Louisville to kind of do a dress rehearsal before the real meat of the season starts.
Yeah, and I'll just throw this little nugget in there. EKU, another A-Sun team, they're
Yeah.
pretty darn good.
Yes, they are.
So these are all you're right. I mean, you get past this game and you just want to make sure that your team is understanding it because you're going to see stuff from a defensive standpoint. You got to make sure there's going to be stuff you haven't seen, that everybody's connected. Anything teams run, you know how you're going to guard it. You're consistent. And then offensively, just being more efficient and that ball doesn't stick. And again, creating some of their own, being able to create shots for others or create shots for themselves, which is what they really struggle with against Tennessee. It's
Right.
going to be the biggest thing is where they can get with the bounce as well, because we just didn't see that against Tennessee and we didn't see much of it really last night. And that's something that you're going to say, okay, well, we really want to see this team. How are they going to create what offensively when things are and the shots aren't going, what else can we run? Who's going to break it down? We've talked about that before. So because it's murderer's row coming up after
Yeah.
this Winthrop game. And
That was,
like you said, all the teams in Bahamas, win or lose against Indiana, you've got a great game after that, regardless.
yeah, that you really do. And I will say one more thing. If you're able to, assuming Louisville does beat Winthrop, because EKU is a good team, UTEP it isn't great, but you're putting yourself in a situation to where you look at NCAA tournament resumes down the line. One of the biggest things that you can do for yourself that's a very simple thing that can trip you up is just make sure you don't have really any ugly losses. And you
Mm-hmm.
get through Winthrop and you're pretty close to getting through not having, a quad 4 loss type deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because EKU will probably be a quad 3 game. I don't know what UTEP will end up being, but Winthrop itself would be a quad 3 game.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to limit the amount of bad losses you have is really almost as important as getting the big wins because that can really, really hurt you both in terms of the quadrants and also in the Ken Palm, the net when that gets released and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the biggest thing. And we just talked about not having that slippage and getting through this and relying on your leaders, relying on your veteran guys. And that's what you built. You build a team that has whatever the flaws are, you have a team that understands what it takes to win in college basketball. This is not new territory for these guys. So they get it. So now you're relying on these guys and then it ramps up. But they know. They know they'll get through this, and then they know what's ahead of them. They're looking ahead every one game at a time, and we're not looking ahead blocking out the noise.
Is it all
No,
BS?
no, it's all BS. Every player is talking about, man, can't wait for Duke to come in, and Bahamas. This is gonna be a heck of a game. Yeah, but you just got to make sure we're focused on taking care of business on Friday, and then it's there. But they know. You
How
just
much
don't talk about it as a coach, but they all know.
How much does it help Louisville that even though it's a different resort, different ballroom or whatever, the fact that they've already gone down to the Bahamas and played a game in a similar or two games actually in a similar setting?
Yeah, it's helpful. Obviously, the ramp up on competition
Yeah.
is gonna change a lot of that. But having routine, and I'm sure that whether it's traveling a way that was similar to what they did before, obviously it's different locations and whatnot, but trying to keep it as similar because players love routines. And as coaches, that's what you try and instill, whether it's how you practice, getting up, workouts, all those type of things, when you eat, how you travel. The routine is you don't want surprises. And so for this, yeah, it's hey, we've gone down there and we know what to expect and we know how we're going to play and we're going to give it the same energy we had last time. So yeah, it's a part of it for sure. Now, you going into a completely different ball game, but absolutely, it does help. It does help, and whatever you can do to brainwash your team and make them believe, hey, this is a routine for us and we're familiar with this. It does help.
I will say one of the things you said a couple minutes ago about Louisville and the big test of will they be able to beat guys off the dribble, go one on one against high major opponents and get buckets. Indiana's an interesting case for that because IU has struggled so much in the Woodson era and including their first couple games this year with, they they like to overhelp. They really like to overhelp and they leave dudes wide open a lot because they get stuck in rotation so often when a lot of times they really don't need to be stuck in rotation to where I look at the way Louisville can move the ball and get open looks. If they're hitting shots, I feel like which I was stunned when I was looking at it earlier today. Indiana's actually, opponents are only shooting like 26% or something like that from three so far this year, which is, really, really good. But a lot of that is as we've talked about it ad nauseum in the past,
Mm-hmm.
3-point percentage is blind luck. A lot of the times, it's more about the quality of looks you give up more than if they actually make them or not. But the way Indiana defends, I think it sets up well for Louisville to be able to get some open shots. And if they're able to have a guy like Cason Pryor, I think is going to be such a big key because he's top 10 nationally in drawing fouls right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen him not as much in the Tennessee game. I think he tried to do it, but was kind of, to be completely honest, got shut down a little bit by what Tennessee was able to do defensively. I don't know if Indiana is going to be able to do the same type of thing, but Malik Renew's a guy that's really struggled with foul trouble throughout his career. If Cason Pryor is able to get downhill a little bit, draw a couple fouls on him, that could take away some of the perceived really big advantage Indiana has on the other end of the floor. But I just look so much at the ball movement. Now I say if they're able to move the ball, Chris, if if they're able to get into that rhythm offensively, I think the way Indiana defends on the back end and how they struggle to rotate and overhelp a lot of times can bode very well for Louisville in this game.
Yeah, and look, against Tennessee, it became stagnant because look, the first set they had was some false action and a quick dribble handoff. Louisville loves to run slips on their pick and rolls and then into Spain actions where they're setting back screens. They do that a lot. Did it last night, and it's hard action to guard. You get right into a screen, a false cut, a dribble handoff, right into a ball screen, and then a Spain action, and that's hard to guard. And even on the first possession against Tennessee, Hadley kind of lifted up. If he stays in the corner, Chucky Hepburn has him in that spot. So I think against Indiana, that's something that you're going to see. You're going to put those bigs in a lot of having to guard two actions, having to guard a handoff right into a ball screen, having to guard a Spain, which is just a back screen and exchange and talk on that stuff. And then you're going to get where bigs switch out. And that's when guards can create. And you talked about the overhelp. They see a big on a guard. That's when you overhelp, and that creates, because of the spacing Louisville does a very good job of, now you're going to be in a position where you can make shots or drive closeouts. So I think that's what Louisville's going to really try and do, attack their bigs in a lot of those ball screens and slips, back screens, and so on.
Yeah, which Indiana will switch a lot. Typically 1 through 4, especially they will not switch Umar Ballo. He will play drop coverage and pretty consistently play drop coverage. He's hedged because Indiana's played 3 games so far. I've seen him hedge a couple times, and he actually
Hmm.
did it better than what I thought that he was capable of doing, to his credit. So maybe you'll see that thrown in every once in a while, but I do think you'll get a lot of drop coverage when you put Umar Ballo in the
Yeah.
screen game. Yeah.
And the way to attack him is a lot of roll and replaces because then you have whether it's a Waterman and you have a Scott roll and you have a Pryor or Waterman lift or even a 4-man lift where he's going to have to plug and take that guy. And it's late sometimes on the switch outs where, yeah, he's going to stay in that drop, but sometimes whoever's guarding the roller might just take that half misstep. And now you have a lift by a big. And whether it's a pick and pop or a roll and replace, Louisville's going to try and attack them and have their bigs with their spacing and have a Pryor, a Waterman, those type of guys come up and look for 3-point shots. I mean, that's the way to attack teams that do a lot of drop coverages.
Yeah, which I'll say, I honestly think this game's going to come down to one thing, because I think Louisville's going to be able to get good looks from three on a lot of the things we've talked about. I think Indiana's going to have that big advantage in the paint on the other end. But a lot of this is going to come down to something that, I'm sure Pat Kelsey and his team's been working on since the Tennessee game, and something that what Indiana's been good under Mike Woodson. I think they did a really good job of this in the South Carolina game, who they beat by 16, which South Carolina's not a great win, but it's a power conference team. So
Mm-hmm.
it's something, at least. I'll put it that way. And even in the Tennessee exhibition that they played in Knoxville back in October, when Mike Woodson's teams are successful defensively, they do a really good job of pressuring the ball in the half court and pushing the offense out.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Indiana has their success defensively. Look where Louisville struggled in that Tennessee game. It was they couldn't handle the physicality of Zakai Ziegler and Meshack and all the length, the size, and athleticism Tennessee had. So to me, if Louisville's able to get to the spots they want to offensively, that's where everything else we've already talked about absolutely applies. I think Louisville's going to get great shots and be able to score at a very high rate. But if they struggle with Indiana's guards, or Caden Carlisle is
Well,
really, really good on-ball defender. Miles Rice has shown some potential there. Galloway's a guy also. That's where it's like, okay, to me, that's where a lot of the game will come down to is, can Louisville initiate offense the way it wants to, or will Indiana be able to push them out farther on the perimeter?
the counter to that is what Tennessee did a really good job is pushing their bigs out. And I don't know if Indiana's bigs are going to do
No, they
that. The
will not.
pressure, so the pressure release,
Yeah.
playing through the bigs and playing through a high post release and pressure release and then into zooms and then the dribble
Yeah.
handoffs. I mean, that's the way to attack teams that are in drop. And those are ways because the bigs for Louisville are really proficient at that. When you're talking about Case and Pryor, Scott, and Waterman, they're really good at that type of action because, again, they can pressure release, which means just flash to the basketball, catch it, go right into a dribble handoff, and pick and pop, or
Yeah.
go right into a zoom with a back cut and create, and then a quick roll, and then the biggest showing for half a second, and you have a little pocket pass. So there's what Tennessee did a really good job of is making those passes difficult. They were contesting every pass, every cut, every dribble. You talked about Indiana's guards doing that. If it's not connected, you can have the guards pressuring, but if the bigs are pressure releasing and you can just throw it to them and play off of that. And a lot of times, like I said earlier in the show, the passer's dangerous. So once he makes that pass, he can cut, and you have to help off of that. It opens up shots for the big. So that's going to be the chess match that you're going to see in this game, which will be interesting. I think what you're going to see a lot of, Jack, is them playing through the bigs, not expecting the guards to do over dribbling or create a lot of their own. I think it'll be playing through the bigs with pressure release, dribble handoffs, roll and replaces, pick and pops. I think that's what you'll see a lot more of than relying on the guards to have to really just create their own. I think it's going to be where you have effective bigs, and that also includes Terrence Edwards to be in those spots. So you have a lot of guys who have multiple skill sets from the bigs who can pass it and shoot it. So I think that's where Louisville's really going to attack Indiana.
Yeah, I will say Umar Ballo to me is the big question, because we know he's going to play drop coverage. He's not going to high hedge a lot. Renew, and when they go small, which Indiana's done more to their credit than I thought they were going to this year so far. When they're playing Mbako or a guy like Bryson Tucker or Luke Goody At the four, I think they can pressure a little bit more, but I just don't think Indiana's going to want to take Ballo so far away from the basket.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's part of the issue when you play Louisville is because they have so many guys that can shoot the ball. And even a guy like James Scott, as you said, can lift up and play really well in that dribble handoff motion and that zoom action. To where I think that's going to be the big question mark is can Indiana or how does Louisville attack Umar Ballo? Can Indiana mask that deficiency? Because if you got to take Umar Ballo off the floor, that's fine, but that's where you lose a lot of the rebounding edge that you expect Indiana to
Of
have in this
course.
game. And if you do that, that to me is also advantage Louisville to where
Mm-hmm.
Indiana's playing smaller. And yeah, Malik Reneau's still going to be a big problem trying to guard him in the most, but you're not having to defend that as much as what you think you were going to have to do.
No, absolutely. So, you don't want to just take off your better players because of the way a team's attacking it. And then what you have to do is figure out a way to attack them on the defensive end as well and put him into actions that's going to be tough for Louisville to guard. But it's never easy. And
Right.
guarding at the collegiate level, you're never taking everything away. You're not going to have a shutout. But what you have to do is find a way schematically that we're going to attack them. And that's what really goes into scouting. People think it's just, okay, we know their plays, we're taking this away. No, you are just systematically diving in and you're just watching just play after play after play. How can we attack them? And that goes back to what we talked about earlier. You watch some of the Bellarmine film saying, all right, this is how Bellarmine attacked Louisville. We might just put in a wrinkle here or there. And we're looking at ways that Louisville's susceptible. And that's what you're doing with everything. You're doing that against Indiana. You talked about Bella with the drop coverages. Okay, let's get our bigs into a lot of high post action because that's going to be hard for Indiana to guard.
Which I think where Indiana's going to test Louisville on the other end. You talked about all the chin action, the diagonals that Bellarmine did. I think they're looking at that Tennessee film, especially, and saying, okay, we're going to put Miles Rice and Trey Galloway in a lot of ball screens with
Mm-hmm.
either Ballo or Reneau, and we're going to see how Louisville can defend those because that's one playing to Indiana's strength because Miles Rice and Galloway are very good at that, and
Yes.
two using the size advantage of Ballo and Reneau and trying to get into the paint, which we know Indiana's going to want to get into the paint a bunch in that game.
Yeah, I think Louisville needs to clean up their ball screen defense. And I never say coverage because the three guys outside of it, it's not just the two guys involved because that's what happened a lot. The tags were late. They weren't taking two steps towards the ball screens. And again, Louisville was susceptible. Tennessee ran six floppy actions, and all that was something that was troublesome for Louisville as well. And it wasn't just the floppies. There's pin downs, having the big show out. That's something that you're going to look at from Indiana as well. And what that does too, you can set those pin downs and race into a flat ball screen. So there's different ways to get into those actions, which I'm sure Indiana is going to look at and say, okay, here's ways we're going to attack Louisville.
Yeah, which Indiana does run a lot of floppy for Mackenzie and Baco, especially in that Tennessee exhibition. They did
Mm-hmm.
that. They'll run that for Luke Goody some as well. They haven't pulled it out too much this year. I wonder if Woodson's saving it, but Trey Galloway's really good in zoom action. To where I could see them. They ran it a lot last year with Reneau or Kalel Ware at the high post to where, or even posted up to where they would kind of run Galloway off a bunch of screens on the baseline, then
Mm-hmm.
have him kind of curl, usually off the left block and kind of, either get a little floater or dump off, kick it out for a three, that type of thing, to where I think they might utilize that a little bit more. But I'm interested, how would you try? Yeah, because we've seen. I think the South Carolina is a good example for this because South Carolina played a lot of drop coverage early. Indiana had success against it. They started blitzing screens early in the second half. They struggled a little bit, but then they found a little bit of an adjustment to where they had Malik Reneau's short roll. They had, Tucker and Mbako kind of cut from the corners off of the short roll to kind of create a little bit of a 3-on-2 advantage. How do you expect Louisville to try to defend that pick and roll and just kind of, try to keep Indiana out of the paint
Yeah,
as
they've
best
shown.
as they can?
Well, that's the thing, and they've shown it's really. And I'll tell you this, Jack. It's how good you actually guard, and you could whatever coverages you are when you switch, making sure you get into the inside, showing out, making the dribble go east and west. Louisville has shown a propensity to do a lot of switching, and then you're seeing Case and Pryor blitz out and trap. He's been the guy, him and Scott, where everybody else has been almost in switching actions. You haven't seen a lot of drops. You've seen that, but I think what they're going to do, it really is, you want to force on any type of ball screen, you really want to take away that corner pass and you want to take a roll, whether it's a short roll, get an arm across and a tag. You want to force skips and fades against that because that gives you time. You can't determine who, but how that pass is going to be made. And if you're in a blitz or a switch, you have high hands. And no matter what, that pass has to be skipped. And that gives you a time to recover. That buys half a second for your defense. So I don't think Louisville's going to do anything exotic. I think they're going to stay with what they've been doing, which is switching and blitzing. It's just cleaning up and having the guys outside of that, the two guys involved in the ball screen, just being in two places at once, more activity, higher hands, tagging that roll, whether it's a short roll, having an arm across to take that away and force a skip or fade, not letting yourself get pinned in. I just think it's just being better at it. And I really, it sounds simplistic, but it really is. You watch them just being late on certain actions, cleaning those things up. You didn't see it against Bellarmine, but I'm sure that's what they've been doing a lot of in practice.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm interested to see in the Winthrop game. If Winthrop's going to run a little bit more ball screen action, which
Right.
compared to Bellarmine, they will, because everyone runs more ball screen offense compared to Bellarmine. That's just not what they do. And they've had a lot of success for a lot of years not running those ball screens, but to see if Louisville's able to do that. But then Indiana will obviously be a much bigger step in that as well with those guards. I'm very excited to see Chucky Hepburn and Miles Rice go at each other because, Chucky is I don't know this. He's third in the nation in steal percentage, which is very, very, very elite. There's no other way to get around it. He's always had he's always been a pest on the defensive end. He's had that reputation, but I feel like he's really kind of taken it another level so far here at Louisville, to where I'm very excited to see him and Miles Rice, who is uber talented and really, to be quite honest, got the best of Zakai Ziegler in the exhibition game in Knoxville in October, to where I'm very, very, very excited to see those two guys go at it and see who's able to kind of get the upper hand on that one.
I watched some of it, but I want to rewatch the scrimmage against Tennessee, the exhibition against Tennessee.
It's a good watch. I mean, that game, the South Carolina game, are the only two teams with a pulse Indiana's played so far, but the Tennessee game's really interesting because Indiana doesn't run a whole lot in that game. They, tried a lot of post-ups early. They got a lot of stuff in transition, but a lot of it was just giving the ball to Miles Rice and say, pick and roll, beat your guy, and get by Zakai Ziegler on a pick and roll. But they did run a lot of floppy action in that game too. They got some good shots, but South Carolina, we talk about it so much with Indiana in the paint, or at least, I talk about this, a Louisville podcast, but trying to, post ups and playing through the post. They only had 12 post ups in 79 possessions against South Carolina, which is a very low number for Indiana. That's somewhere like the 10-12% range, where traditionally under Woodson, they've been somewhere like 20-22%, which is one of the higher marks in the country, to where they still obviously will go to that. But I think they've shown that they'll play smaller more often, and they play a little bit more modern, which for, the Indiana side of things is encouraging, but also, they're not going to just straight post up as much. Of course, they might just see the Louisville matchup and say, we're going to play bully ball. They could absolutely be doing that as well, trying to take advantage of the size advantage they'll have down there.
Yeah, Louisville has shown they've been firing, meaning just doubling down on the post. They did that in the Bahamas. They did that even against Bellarmine. They'll counter that with trying to trap that post. If it becomes where Indiana's just trying to throw it in and just play 4 round one and just go high low and whatnot.
Yeah, which they will go high low too, out of the post as well.
Yeah, and again, trying to keep it out of, and that's the difficult part, because you can't really double from that angle, but trying to get it, just forcing the guy 3 inches away from his sweet spot and doubling that, because and just firing down quickly. That's what Louisville's shown somewhat, and I think they'll be prepared for that as well.
Yeah, which, that becomes, can Louisville rotate well? Because Renew is a very willing passer. He's a good passer for a big guy. They don't have anyone like Trace Jackson Davis a couple years ago was phenomenal passing the ball at the post. They don't have anyone at that level, but both he and Ball have shown that they're proven passers out of the post too. So so Louisville rotating on that end. If you haven't been able to figure it out yet, this is more than just, me following Louisville and Indiana more than I follow any other program in the country. I am absolutely fascinated by this game. I have been for a very long time.
I know you are.
It's such a yin and yang for me of of how the two teams want to play, how they want, Indiana wants to get in the paint. They want to dominate the boards. Louisville wants to, stretch you out. They're going to play five out. I do think it's going to be a very visually pleasing game to watch. Both teams want to get up and down. They're going to play fast. There's going to be a lot of possessions. I'm not really sure who that's going to favor or benefit at this stage, but I do think it's going to be a fun game to watch in that sample. I want to ask you this on the rebounding side. Other than Case and Pryor, I do think Abubakar Traore is probably Louisville's best rebounder so far, or at least I think I'll rephrase that, most proven rebounder from his time before coming to Louisville. Not having him, while my questions with him were always more like, okay, how does he impact the floor spacing offensively? He's not really a threat to shoot. He's only 6'5" or whatever, but he's an absolutely monster on the glass, really, really good at putting ball pressure on guys, can guard multiple positions. I think obviously Louisville's going to be without Corin Johnson as well, but
Mm-hmm.
I think Traore is going to be a piece that they're really going to miss in this game. They could really use his size and or not as much size, but his physicality and just, rebounding up.
Yeah, I think so. I think Corin Johnson's is a big miss too. I
Yep,
really
secondary
do.
ball handler for sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's probably going to hurt a little bit more because the rebounding part, you can get some gang rebounding. You have enough guys who are willing to do it. You just have a guy who's really active. I mean, Hadley's length and Edwards, those guys can mix it up, and they're a real physical when they're focused and what I had seen in practices, what I'd seen leading up to the Tennessee game was that, and I think they'll get back to being a very physical defensive rebounding team. But not having Corin is something where, okay, now we have another guy who's just active and can create, because you're asking a lot of Chucky Hepburn defensively, and then to get him into those actions. That's why it's going to be gang rebounding. I'm sure that's going to be a point of emphasis with this team. It's going to be getting tip outs and going after it. The biggest thing on the offensive end, and I've talked about that before, is anticipating and knowing where your shots are coming from. Against Tennessee, that was stagnant and it was a dribble or one pass and a shot. That doesn't give you a chance to, when you reverse the basketball and you're patient with those type of things, you make the defense slides, you make them close out. They're not in a great position to get a defensive rebound. That gives you the advantage. And on the offensive end is making sure that you're just limiting them to one shot and done. You don't want to give second shots to Indiana, and that's going to be a key thing. Traore, look, he's a physical guy. It's just that's part of the game. You're gonna have to make up for it. Corin, that's unfortunate because that would take some pressure off of Chucky, and I think they would got to the point where those guys are on the floor together quite a bit.
Which I guess technically he could play because it was just kind of diagnosed as shoulder injury. I haven't seen anything about a timetable on that. That's just more of like, and I'm not trying to break any news on that point saying you want to get a play.
I wasn't either. You just, when the guy's out, it's almost like you're not, as a coach, you're just okay. You're almost a pessimist sometimes with that. You try and be encouraged, and we'll see. Maybe he's out there against Winthrop, and that'd be fantastic, and we'll see. But it also shows you again what we had talked about last week is how physical things must have been inside the practice facility inside the keeper center. That must have been, they must have got after it pretty good.
Yep. I'll say this: for whoever ends up winning the Louisville Indiana game, it's quite. I don't think we realized it over the summer and in the preseason how unfortunate it is that the winner of that game is going to get Gonzaga because while it's great and you want to play games like that for, if you're Louisville or Indiana, I think the ultimate goal is obviously go 3-0 and win the championship. No shit. But if you could if you could win,
I didn't know we were allowed to curse on this podcast, but now I know.
Hey,
okay,
we're not on AM radio.
I know.
There's no
I'm
FCC.
just teasing. I know.
My dad does get mad at me though when I curse.
All right, just blame it on me. Tell him it was me. Dub it out. You have all those technical skills. Dub that, and just put my voice or my lips are moving on that. Okay.
But I think a realistic goal for both of these teams would be if you're able to go 2-1 in some way, shape, or form, get a couple of quad one wins. Maybe you lose a game, but the ultimate goal of trying to get to face both Gonzaga and Arizona, the two kind of top tier level perceived teams in this. And in preseason, they were kind of viewed on the same level, but I gotta tell you, Arizona, I think is fine. I think they're like a top 20-ish team. I'm not as big on them as I've been in other Tommy Lloyd years the last couple of years. And that's more of just a testament to how good that program's been under Tommy Lloyd. But, they're good, but I think they're more like top 15, top 20-ish range, not top 5, top 10 like they've been. Gonzaga, I think legitimately might be the best team in the country right now.
I watched them against San Diego State. I mean, that team is really, really good. They're loaded. Yeah, they're good. Nothing else you need to say. That
Yep.
team is stacked.
But
Fun to watch.
my worry now is that whoever wins that game, yes, that's great. I think for either one of those teams, that's going to end up being a quad one win for you. That's something you can put in the feather your cap in the resume and say, hey, we beat Indiana on a neutral court, or we beat Louisville on a neutral court. That could be a really good win for you. But then you go out. I think either one of these teams have a very real shot of just getting boat raced by Gonzaga, to be completely honest. And it has nothing to do with what I think of Louisville or Indiana, but just how damn good Gonzaga has been this year, whether it be the San Diego State game. That's a very, very tough place to go on the road and win. Or, absolutely blowing the doors off against Baylor on opening night by 40. I mean, heck, they beat Arizona State, a power conference team as well in the mix too. But excuse me, but the way they're playing right now, they have that continuity of a bunch of guys that have been there before at Gonzaga. Khalif Battle, I think, is the only real transfer they've brought in. Very experienced laden group, and they just run. They know what they're trying to accomplish so well, especially on the offensive end, to where it's just they're a machine on that end of the floor, man. And I think it's
Well,
going to be a very tough matchup for whoever ends up getting them in day two.
that's where you go back to the cliche of one game at a time, and we're just
Yeah.
focused on Indiana, and that's hey, we'll worry about Gonzaga at midnight.
Yeah, but for us, but for us, where we're doing the podcast here,
that's the coaching side of me, I guess, came out.
That's very fair. But the point being, whereas if Arizona was there, maybe you have a better chance of picking them off than you get Gonzaga in game 3. And then at that point, it's third game in 3 days. Everyone's exhausted. You're trying to fight through it. A lot of, weird stuff can happen. You have a better chance, I feel like, getting a win in that one. Plus, also, you're getting, again, Arizona and Gonzaga, not Gonzaga. And then if you lose that game, Oklahoma or Providence, who are fine teams, but that's not going to be the type of statement game that a Gonzaga or an Arizona can present for you.
No question. No question.
Yeah. But you agree with that though, to where I think Gonzaga is the best team in the country right now, either them or
I do.
them or Auburn.
Yeah. No, I think they are. Auburn's right there too. So no question. Absolutely. I just love the way they play, watching them get to really, I didn't get to see the Baylor game, watching them just last night. I mean, they're as efficient. Like you said, they get into their flow so well. They're really good. And Auburn's right there, but it's early, but Gonzaga, maybe this is the year. Who knows? But we'll see.
It very well could be, but I mean, what impressed me was they didn't have their flashiest game against San Diego State, but San Diego State is so good defensively year in, year out. They pressure the ball better than almost anyone. You think you probably throw them in that group year in, year out with the Auburns, the Houstons, the Marquettes, which they had a big win over Purdue on Tuesday night as well. But they make things really difficult for you to get into that rhythm offensively. And Gonzaga was still able to drive right at them. They matched their toughness, which was something that fairly or unfairly has been a criticism of Mark Few's teams in the past, is that they struggle with athleticism and toughness. San Diego State's going to give you that. And they fought through that, and they led that game by like 10, 15, 18 points, basically the entire night down there.
Yep, sure did.
It was a fun one. It was a very fun one. Well, it's going to be a very fun week here. Obviously, Louisville Winthrop on Friday night. Then we get the Bahamas next week. Coach, anything else you want to hit on before we get out of here?
I think we hit on quite a bit, and just looking forward to Feast Week and basketball next week. It's fantastic. Nothing better. And I know you coming into town for your big spread as usual.
Oh, absolutely. I'm flying in. I planned it out perfectly because I wasn't able to get the whole week off like I did last year because work, all that stuff. But I'm flying up Wednesday morning, and I get in at 9:15, so I'm gonna be there just in time to watch Indiana Louisville tip off.
Look at you! Look at you!
And I figured it out the back end too, to where it actually worked out. I am gonna be there a week. Actually, it's not the week I was planning on. To where I had a couple days off on the back end, to where I'll be in town for Louisville Ole Miss as well. So I'm excited to be the upsetter for that one. What'll probably be a very charged atmosphere that Tuesday night.
Oh yeah. I'll see you there.
Absolutely. That'll be a great one. I'm excited. I haven't seen much of Ole Miss yet. I don't know if you have, but I'm expecting, a lot of the same stuff. Yeah, Chris Beard, no middle defense. I know they're a little bit more offensive reliant this year than what Chris Beard teams traditionally are, but that's going to be a fun challenge for Louisville as well.
Oh, no question. But one game at a time. Let's take care of Winthrop and then on to Indiana.
On to Cincinnati, as Bill Belichick would say. Coach, appreciate the time as always. For Mark Lee.